Good morning, everyone. Hello, Vasiliki and the students there. Morning, Dev. I'm Ollie. I'm the CEO of London United. We're the esports organisation that is using gaming as a medium to try and address social issues. And this is a campaign that we're delighted to be doing, where we're fusing education and esports together to try and give you some skills that can be used in our broadcasts in a few weeks. So this is the first of our workshops on public speaking. We're really pleased to have Andy Mia from Salford with us. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Andy, who's going to talk about the principles behind public speaking and hopefully give you some tips to create some content which can be utilized in our Twitch streams in the middle of the month. And then we'll be joined by Rambo and FaZe Clan's task for the Q&A around 11ish. So I'm going to hand over to Andy.
Thanks very much, Ollie, and I hope you can all hear me fine. I'm delighted to be here and especially keen to speak to so many different people about something I really love doing. And I noticed that you guys that are in the school, I saw one of the questions you had for me was, how do you get over your fear of public speaking? Because of course, so many of the things that we do are quite terrifying because they're in the public domain. I have a son who's 10 years old, and he sees me gives lots of talks all over the world. He often comes with me to sit in on see things. And what I've done with him over the last few years to get him increasingly comfortable with being in public. And this is one of the things that when I was a child, it wasn't something we sort of had to do. We didn't have all these different streaming technologies that are out there allowing us to share our gaming content or to connect with other people that are streaming their own content. So it feels like public speaking today is a whole different ballgame compared to what it was even 10 years ago. And I want to spend some time talking a bit about that today, because there are so many different ways in which you can become a public speaker. And I think you can start in the playground. My son started when he was 5 years old, telling stories about dinosaurs that he loved. And we made short videos about this, looked at really amazing presenters like David Attenborough, who do a fantastic job with speaking in all sorts of ways. And I think that's one of the things to remember, is that there's not just one way to be a public speaker. And I'll give you a few examples as we get through this. But for me, I really love to make it incredibly creative. So during our talk and our time together today, I want to share with you some of the sort of creative things that you can do to both make it more enjoyable and perhaps a little bit less terrifying, but also to make it more creative. And I remember when I started off public speaking, which was when I was about sort of 20, 22 years old, and where the only thing you could really do in my job as someone that was going into being a professor at a university was to give talks in front of my other student friends, people that were starting to learn about their studies as well. And I always wanted to make it creative and fun and interesting and dynamic and engage people with animations and all sorts of visual effects. And so making it creative was a good way for me to feel more comfortable in that world. I want to show you some of the things that I bring into my public speaking now, because actually most of what I do is standing up in front of an audience talking about my work. And all of my work touches on technology. So I write about the internet, I write about esports, I write about virtual reality, and all of these things are providing completely new ways to be a public speaker. So I'm going to give you some examples. So what do I have with me here? I have with me here a virtual reality headset. Hopefully you can all see this. So hands up if you've done any virtual reality experiences. Ollie definitely has. Good, great. So one of the platforms I've discovered in this environment, so this is an Oculus Quest. The Oculus Quest 2 is also out now. And one of the things that's in this experience is a platform called Spatial, which is a platform where you can meet up with other people and not just see them as kind of graphics, but actually see them as people and have conversations with them. You can create your own sort of public space in them. So you can recreate your classroom in this space and have teaching take place within it. So these are now places where people go to have public events, and learning how to experiment with virtual reality is another way in which you can become a public speaker. So I've now written the last couple of months, I've made a few different videos that are situated within Spatial that show people what it's like in this virtual reality. And for me, when I start to kind of create public events, when I bring that creativity into it, it makes it so much more enjoyable, more fun, more interesting, and hopefully more exciting for the audiences as well. So here's another thing I've got with me.
Andy,
So
I'm
this
just
is
going to
another
ask
thing.
Andy. I'm just going to
Yeah.
ask Hadi, who's joined, to turn on his camera, please. Thank you.
Oh, cool. Cheers, Ollie. Thank you. So here's another prop that I have. This is, as you will see, a drone. Hands up if you've flown a drone before. Great. A few people in the audience there. Excellent. Good to see you. Here you go. And so, of course, when the drones sort of really became popular a few years ago, they became popular for filmmaking, for photography. And of course, you can bring all those things into your public speaking experiences, because most of the public speaking that you guys will do before you get to my old age is to be putting content out onto the internet, putting it onto platforms where people can either see what you're doing as a gamer or even at live events. I mean, one of the things that's most amazing for me is to think that when you guys enter university, in fact, not already, you can join universities and take courses in esports where you can learn about how to produce your own events, how to work with others to create amazing competitions, and of course, to learn how to be public, how to be someone that shares what you're doing in a public setting. So for me, there's sort of a number of kind of key things that you need to think about in order to get to that point where you feel comfortable with what you're doing. So I want to speak about some of these today. So developing your own profile. And this is partly about understanding your voice. What sort of person are you? How do you see yourself? Because it's very easy, I think, to look at amazing streamers and say, well, I want to be like that person. But you may not feel like that's the kind of person that you are. And so it's important not to think, I have to be like that person. There are lots of different ways in which you can be yourself as a public speaker rather than have to be someone that you're not. It's also really important to think about your audience. Who are you speaking to? So you might be speaking to lots of different people of lots of different ages, but actually you might be in a particular community where you've got an audience that's really focused around a specific age range. So think about who you're speaking to first as well. You also need to think about your presence across these public spaces. Now, as a young person that's in a public domain, you have to really take a lot of guidance from your teachers, from your parents, to think about what you're putting out there in the public domain. Because of course, some platforms are out there for people that are over 16-year-old or even over 13 years. So really think about and make sure you've got support from your trusted people around you, trusted adults around you, to develop that portfolio of activity. We did some work at the university last year where we talked to lots of young people about their own digital activity, and many of you guys want to work more closely or be more connected with your parents, your teachers, about what you're doing, and they have so much they can do to help you figure out these environments. It's really a useful way of trying to make sure that you have a positive experience. But in my mind, there's one sort of key thing that I've done, and I've done probably around 400 to 500 sort of presentations over my career. And these have been presentations like this, increasingly over the last 6 months, doing Zoom meetings, talking about things I really love, to giving talks in front of 2,000-3,000 people. I've even done a talk in a boxing ring. They made us put boxing gloves on and have an argument, and it was quite a challenge, because the two people I was up against were two Olympic athletes who were medal winners. Now, needless to say, they won the battle, but it was actually the most embarrassing moment of my life. I had to get up on this stage in a boxing robe, wearing boxing gloves, and talk about serious issues. But and I was quite terrified about that, because we also had to come into sort of boxing music as well. For those of you that know the theme tune of the film Rocky, this was playing in the background. So it was really embarrassing. And yeah, I look back on it and think, gosh, I'm glad I did that. And partly, I think the secret to experiencing public speaking in a way that is positive rather than feeling terrified about it is actually to convince yourself that you're going to have a good time. So this is my first tip for you. You have to actually decide for yourself that you're going to enjoy it. And it's weird because you think, well, if I'm definitely not feeling that way, how can I do that? But actually, your brain will send signals to your body that tells your body that you're going to enjoy something, and you'll come out of it having a more positive experience. It'll make you smile more during your presentation, so you feel that you are having a good time as well. So this sort of trick that you can play on yourself is a great way to think about your own approach to it. And again, if you're not speaking, and this is true whether you're speaking in front of a big audience, whether you're online, or whether you're just giving a presentation to your class. I meet so many university students who are maybe 18, 20 years old even, who are terrified of standing up in front of their friends to give a presentation about their work. And I think it's really simple. You just have to practice, 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 and practice. Do more of it so that you become much more comfortable. And it's true for nearly everything that we do. In order to get better at anything, in order to feel less anxious about it, you just need to do more of it. But there are lots of key things that you can do to help yourself figure out some of this really complicated stuff that really helps you feel both that you're doing sort of professional work, that you're doing work that you can feel proud of, and to make sure that you see all the possibilities. And I think that one of the crucial parts of that process is not to limit yourself. My son, who I mentioned a few times, he's very obsessed about a particular streamer at the moment, a guy called Syntac. And he's someone that really loves to watch gaming activity. He becomes a bit too interested in just one streamer. And I think you have to open your mind to lots of different activity to really see the possibilities. It's like playing an instrument. If you're just playing the same song every time, then that's all you'll be able to do. Instead, it's far better to actually look and see all the different possibilities that are out there, and try to copy them as well. One of the best things that you can do to be a better public speaker is just to try things out. It's trying on new clothes. Just see which things you like, see what works for you, and then see if it's something you're comfortable with, because that's such a big part of it. Making sure that you feel comfortable with what you're doing is so crucial. Ethan, my son, he spent some of his lockdown period before the summer making videos about virtual reality experiences. And I set him up in my studio. I have a studio in my house with some lights and some cameras. And I just left him there to experiment with a mobile phone to make films about this virtual reality experience. And it took him a long time. I mean, that's one of the things that I think is really important to bear in mind, is that it can take a long time to feel comfortable doing this, even if it's just making videos. To make videos that you feel proud of is really difficult. And there are a few things you can do to make sure that what you produce is the sort of thing that you feel proud of and that you want to share with people. And I'll talk a bit more about that as I go through this. But amongst those things that you must consider and really think crucially about is this first one: keeping it real, making sure that you are true to yourself as a person, have a good sense of what sort of thing you want to do. And it's good to have different role models that you look up to, that you can copy and think, well, that's the sort of thing I'd like to be doing, and trying that to see if you can copy what they're experimenting with. You can also take the second principle, and I think this is the crucial part of being a great public speaker. In fact, it's a great part of being good at anything. You have to take risks. So many of my students, when they start to make films with mobile phones, literally just picking up their phone, making a video of themselves, they watch it back and they cringe. I mean, they find it so embarrassing to watch themselves. And this is such a common thing. Everyone feels this way, especially when you're starting out. Sometimes when you give a public talk, you can actually feel that you've not done your best job. And that's okay. It's fine for not every experience to be an amazing thing. You can learn from it. Anything that you do, you learn from, take into your next performance. And often the things that you produce, even if they are public, they won't always be seen by millions of people. So you can use your time, especially as a younger person, to spend time just developing your skills, developing your confidence, making sure that you start to experiment and try out lots of different new formats. So the third principle I've got, which you can see here, is to repeat. So as I mentioned, a key part of this process is to make sure that you keep practicing. And I'll give you a sort of example from my own world. I make short videos sort of every week. And one of the problems you have with making videos is whether you have to write a script for them or not. Now, for some presentations, you may want quite a detailed script, and there are great applications that are out there that will allow you to put your script in front of you, so that you can be looking at the camera but also looking at your script, and then you can read it off. So that's one way to do it. And if you do it that way, it can work really well. You might feel that what you've got is really precise as the words you're using, but I don't often work like that. I think it's very difficult to do that very well, but also it can take a lot of time to craft your script together to then read it out in a way that you're happy with it. I prefer, a bit like here, trying to just talk to people, having conversations with them, and give presentations as if I'm having a conversation with somebody, which is why it's especially nice to see all of your faces on these video screens, because I feel like I'm talking to you. And that's one simple trick you can take into a public event. You can just, although you've got maybe 100, 200 people in front of you, even 10 people in front of you, don't try to speak to everybody at the same time. Really think about where your eyes are going. Who are you speaking to? So I'm looking at Ollie at this point, or I'm looking at Hugo at this point, and you can make specific points to individuals. And it's even easier when those people are friends of yours, or your classmates, or people that you can have some kind of understanding of what they're there for, why they're listening to what you're saying. This is a good way for you to feel that you're not just standing in front of a big audience. You're actually talking to people that you know and that you feel comfortable with, people that are a bit like your family. And that's one of the other things that's really helpful to do, is to really try to make that environment a place where you feel comfortable. So when, in a time when when we used to, obviously with the COVID lockdown, we don't tend to have physical events anymore. And so for the events that I do now, it's much harder. But whenever I go to give a public talk, I always want to make sure that I go into the venue before the event takes place. So this Zoom meeting, I was here probably 20, 30 minutes before it took place, because I wanted to make sure everything was set up really well. And that's such a detailed thing to do. So if you look at your classroom at the moment, or the place you're sitting in, it's having an understanding about what it is you need to deliver the kind of talk or presentation that you want to do. So for example, where do you stand? How are you facing? Do you sit? Do you make sure that, do you have space to put your notes? Sometimes you may not have a place where you can actually put down some notes that you want to refer to. So you might need a clipboard. You might want to have some water next to you in case your mouth gets dry. These are all things that just require a bit of preparation. And that's another kind of key principle for doing this sort of thing, making sure you prepare and think about the possibilities that may arise. So for example, as you can see, I've got background slides to this presentation, some of which I'm talking to in detail, some of which I'm just going through very quickly. But I'd be quite happy without these slides. I'd be happy to talk to you if I didn't have these backgrounds. It's a helpful reminder of some of the things I want to say, but it's not essential to giving a talk about talks to you. And I think that's another thing that's useful to remember, is that you could decide that you're going to use a fancy presentation in the background to show people what it is you want to say in a creative and visual way. But what if the technology fails? How would you feel if you're spending your 5 minutes before your presentation starts messing around with the technology and trying to get it all to work? Could you just decide that you're going to stop the presentation and just talk to people without these slides? And that's something that takes a lot of practice to be comfortable doing, but it's such an important thing to feel that you can do. So again, another principle when you're giving any kind of talk, whether it's to a class or whether it's to an audience online, is to decide for yourself that you're happy to talk about the subject without any of these props around you. And that'll help you feel, again, more confident to be able to do that. And there are so many different ways in which you can sort of think about your starting point as a public speaker. There are so many different ways in which you can be a public speaker. I think that's one of the key messages I have for you, is that idea about your voice is very much about where it is you are speaking, whether you feel part of that community, whether you feel that you are an insider to it. This idea is, again, for me, a really important part of the process. When you give a talk, it's important that you feel part of that place. And that can be difficult because you may be walking into a room or may not know anyone there, but that's why you spend time in the space, getting to know it, feeling comfortable there, making sure that you're the first person in the room, so that you feel ownership of that space, that it's your space, that people are coming into your space, or like they're coming into your house. It's a place where you feel perfectly comfortable. So As I mentioned earlier, one of the things I really like to do, and that I think can really help you feel confidence in what you're doing, but also to make sure that you feel that you are going to have an enjoyable experience, is to think about that creative side of it. So when you start to, if you have the opportunity to give a presentation to an audience, then start off by thinking creatively about what that experience will be like. How will you make it fun for people? How will you make it, but more importantly, how will you make it fun for yourself? How can you make it a creative process rather than something that you feel strongly that you are worried about? A few years ago, I found myself giving a really big public talk to around 500 people. And I was quite confident with what I was going to do. But as I traveled to the destination, the computer that I had actually broke. So the presentation that I had was no longer available. And I really wanted to talk to some of the slides, some of the information in the background. So what I ended up doing was handwriting slides on blank pieces of paper and then taking photographs of it and using that as my presentation. And I used a platform which, if you haven't come across this platform, it's really cool, really interesting to have a look at. It's called Prezi. It's not something that you usually find in schools, but you can access it online. And it's a really innovative presentation software that feels much more creative than the standard presentation platforms. And you can have a look at this and see if you can create very artistic visual experiences for people to see. And it makes it far more enjoyable for you as a speaker to do that. It also makes it more interesting for the audience to play with these visuals. Create simple messages for people. Don't overburden your imagery with too much text. As you can see here, you can have simple statements that allow you to get across quite simple messages to people. One of the mistakes that people often make is to overcomplicate the messages they want to send to people. So I want to run through 6 really kind of key tips that I think are important to consider, some of which I've covered and are recapping what I've talked about. So first of all, talk to individuals in your audience. When you get in front of an audience and you see a number of people, break them down into individuals. Don't just talk to a whole audience, talk to individuals within it. Next one, get to know your venue. As I mentioned earlier, feeling comfortable in the space. Even simple things like, let's say you've got 10 minutes to give a talk. How are you going to keep track of time? How are you going to make sure that you keep on time during your talk? How do you make sure that if you find yourself taking too long, that you know that you can speed up? Now, you can wear a watch. That's always a helpful thing. But you might find that if you look around the room you're in, there may be a clock somewhere on the wall. And again, when you get to know the venue early enough, you can see where that clock is and then be able to refer to it. Otherwise, you end up in a situation where you're having to tell people that you're rushing what you've got to say, or you're skipping over lots of content. And it may not go the way you want it to go because you feel rushed. Another key thing you can do is to work out your opening sentence and stick to it. So one of the things that I always try to do to avoid those nerves that you have when you stand up in front of people is to decide beforehand what your opening sentence is going to be. So to give you one example, I often talk to students about the media and how it's changing. So I will sometimes get up and start off by saying, on my way to work today, I went past a newsagent and saw a bunch of newspapers on the stand. And I thought to myself, I've not bought a newspaper in over a year. And I wonder how many people are like me. And then I'll ask the audience, how many of you have bought a newspaper in the last year? And most of them will not put their hands up because most people aren't buying newspapers anymore, it seems. But for me as the speaker, the benefit of having done that is that I've started with something really personal and very memorable about my day. And the other thing that I've achieved by saying that is that people now are starting to build a picture in their head about something that I've done. You're hopefully starting to imagine me going on my way to work and the journey that I took. So by having an opening sentence, and you can do this also on videos. In fact, many streamers, for example, will have their sort of opening sentence used on all of their videos. They'll start off with a particular intro that they use. And even spending some time thinking about what's your opening intro is a really useful thing to do, because it sets the scene for your personality as well, and also sets the scene for the expectations of your viewers as well. So by thinking about your opening sentence, you really help yourself feel more confident, but you also tell your listeners or viewers what to expect. So another thing which is really important is to rehearse your talk. Now, I've given a couple of, how many, hands up if you've ever seen a TED talk. Anyone see this online? So TED, of course, has become an incredibly popular way of showing people ideas and explaining ideas to people. And you can see videos from TED and TEDx events all over the internet. They're great examples of how to give talks. And one of the reasons why they are great examples is that for every event that they produce, the speakers have to rehearse before they give their talk. So I've done a couple of TEDx talks over the last few years, and some of them have been quite big venues, maybe 2,000-3,000 people. And the team that's producing the event, that's getting everything working, one of the things that they do the day before the event happens is they make sure they have a full dress rehearsal. So this is where everybody turns up and has to deliver their entire talk as if it's the live event. And it really forces you to practice what you're going to say, but doing it in a way that's complete. It's not just skimming through what it is you think you want to say, doing a few bits here and there. It's coming out on the stage with all the lights up, a small audience there of people that will sit and then give you feedback about what you're doing and how you've performed, that then you can take forward into your actual performance. It's of course what everyone does in any kind of entertainment industry, whether it's music or theater or cinema, television. We're always practicing everything that we do. And of course, if you think about TV and film, we know, of course, and even music, nobody does these things in one take. That's really hard to perfect. To be able to do an amazing presentation in one take is really difficult. So rehearsing your talk is one of the most important things that you can do to, again, feel more confident, but also make sure that what you do is really good and that you can feel really proud about. And there are lots of different ways you can do that. So if you want to make videos and you're trying to make video content, then if you don't have anybody around you, you can just record yourself and then evaluate and criticize what it is you think you did, and then repeat it again. So even if you don't have anybody around you to give you feedback on what you're doing, then you can still learn from your own mistakes by recording and looking at it yourself. But of course, if you can share what you're doing with friends that you trust and feel comfortable with, then you can get so much more out of it. And even if it's simply sending somebody a message over a mobile phone, a video message that you've created, and asking them to say what they think about it is a really useful way of trying to get some feedback on it. One of the big things that I tell my students all the time is to get other people's opinions. And don't just limit it to your friends. My son, as I mentioned, is 10 years old and of course thinks I'm lame at everything, but he values the feedback I give him on the videos that he makes. And it's partly just having a different perspective from somebody that is helpful. Doesn't matter who they are. It can be your parents, can be your teachers, can be your friends. There's always something that you can learn from what somebody says about your work. So another really simple thing to have available in front of you whilst you're giving a talk is water. Because if you've not done this very much, then you might find that you get a dry mouth when you're giving a talk. Even if it's a video, you can be talking for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and your mouth suddenly dries up. And when it dries up, you can't get anything out of your mouth at all. And it becomes incredibly sort of progressively terrifying because you're conscious that your mouth is drying up and there's nothing you can do about it. So having some kind of drink next to you is a really useful way to feel very secure when you're talking. It also keeps your mouth healthier, so you'll feel the words flow out more easily when you have that available. So then the final one are these 6: evaluate what you did and seek the views of others. So rather than like getting rehearsing your talk, getting that feedback is really an important part of the process. Making sure that you open yourself up to the ideas and opinions of others is also really difficult, though, because of course we don't usually like to be criticized. We kind of hope that when we've done something, people will watch it and see it and think, wow, that's amazing. But we have to also remember that we're still learning. So even if what you've done is pretty good or really good, even, you can always get better. So I think you have to have a mindset that accepts the fact that you're not the best in the world. And even if you are the best in the world at something, you still have to work at it, because to stay at that point really requires a lot of hard work. So embracing the idea that you're not just perfect, that there's always something that you can learn from by hearing what other people think, is a great way to make sure that you do feel comfortable with what it is you're presenting. So I've got a few sort of rules that I want to bring into this as well. I've got to kind of, if you're ever designing your talk or your presentation for an audience, I have what I call the 3+ rule. Now, very often in presentations, people will talk about having 3 principles that you want to get across, or 3 messages that you want to get across to your audience. And that's a really useful thing to bear in mind, because you can overwhelm people. Now, of course, this depends a little bit on what it is you're doing. So if you're commentating on an esports event, then of course what you're trying to do is to keep your language very fluid, so you can keep your conversation coming, make sure people feel engaged with what you're saying. But when you're presenting, you might be presenting as someone that's hosting an event, that's actually chairing commentators. So you might be the host and you've got 2 commentators that are trying to share their perspectives. You've got to really make sure that you're clear about what it is you're trying to share with people. And so I have this sort of 3+ rule principle that helps me think about the key messages that I want to get across. So the first one is that I want to try to explain something. So what is it that you have in your presentation or in your stream, or whatever it is you're trying to get across, that you want to get, what's the most important thing that you want to explain? The 1 or 2 things, or even a category of things that you want people to understand from what it is you're sharing. And that may be game specific if you're talking about gaming activity in particular. So my son likes the game Ark Evolution Evolved. So for him, he loves the different dinosaurs that are within it. And so whenever he thinks about streaming or presenting content, he thinks about explaining the dinosaurs and what types of things they are and what they can do. But having in your mind what are the sorts of things that you want to be explaining to people is really helpful. The next one, a call to action. What is it that you want your audience to actually do after having seen you speak? And again, this will depend on your setting, but let's imagine you're giving a presentation in your class about some science subject. Let's say the sort of creation of its discovery of electricity or gravity or what it might be. What is it you want your audience to do afterwards? How are they going to take what they've learned from your presentation into their everyday lives? And so, for example, for this talk, one of the things I'd really love you to do after you've heard this, and I guess you might do it in a class setting if you have any sort of subjects that allow you to do this, but you can also do it when you get home, is to simply set up a mobile phone and film yourself talking about your day. Now, I've chosen your day because I know it's really simple. You can easily recall what happened in your day. You can talk to the camera about it. You feel comfortable. You don't need to practice it because you can remember it. It happened to you today. But when you do that, you'll see how your presentation looks once you've hit stop and rewatched it. Have a look at your mannerisms. Think about where your eye focus is. Very often when people are recording on mobile phones, they don't always even look at the lens. Some people don't know where the lens is. It can be helpful even to put a little sticker on your phone to point to where the lens is, to draw your attention to it, because often with a mobile phone, it's sort of unclear. So one of the things that you can do after today is when you get home, make a short video, no more than 2 minutes, about your day. And when you look back on that, You may cringe hearing your voice. I still don't like to hear my voice on video or audio. I don't like the sound of my own voice. And I find it embarrassing. But you have to get beyond that and still try to criticize, evaluate, and think about how you can improve your next delivery of something. So you can think about your hand movements. How is it they convey what it is you want to be saying? How they engage with your audience by sort of reaching out to them and telling them something that matters. How you think about the way you pause, give time for people to think about what you're saying, appear that you're reflecting on what it is you're saying, and really trying to get into some specific information that helps people understand something big. And all these sort of hand gestures are good ways to convey what it is you're doing, but also make people feel that you're really interested in what you're doing as well. One of the things that you can't easily tell when you watch, for example, a news presenter on television, is that they are moving their heads quite a lot more than we typically do when we're talking to each other. One of the things you learn when you learn to become a journalist or a news presenter is that the sorts of movements that people do on television are not natural at all. They're incredibly artificial, and they take time to learn. And it takes time to learn the particular habits that make it something that fits the environment that you're presenting in. So bear this in mind. It's something that's really, really important to consider. When you do that video, when you make that video today, if you get home and have a chance to do it, look back at the video, think about whether you're happy with what it looks like. If you're not, record it again. Think about what else you've done for the second time that was different from the first time, and write these things down. I can't emphasize this enough. Really spend time reflecting on the things that you think are good and the things that you would like to change about how you present. So it might be that you are saying things like, you know, or phrases that don't really tell the audience anything, but are there as sort of ways for you to pause whilst you think of your next sentence. It might be that when you do this recording, you discover that you say constantly in your talk. And that's something, when you're suddenly aware of it, you can change. And that's why it's so wonderful that you have these opportunities now that you can record and really get very good at something very quickly because of all these opportunities. And of course, you get feedback from people when you go online and put things out there, and that feels like quite a risky thing to do. But the more you do it, the more comfortable you'll feel, but also the less worried you'll become by having things out there that you feel a bit self-conscious about. You know, not everything is going to be your best work. You won't be like, I've given talks, and there are videos of me giving talks out there on the internet, and I'd really rather they weren't out there because I'm not proud of them. They're not my best work. But you have to just accept that and think about, as I said, that the idea that this is a learning experience. I think we've got another sort of few minutes. If I can keep going, Ollie, are we okay for time? Cool. And again, if you have any questions, no, Ollie's put in the chat. If you have any questions at all, just put them in the chat and I'll just stop what I'm saying and answer your question instead. So feel free to ask at any point. But there is one other sort of key area that I want to talk a bit about, because I think this is one thing that, again, we don't often discuss, is how you establish your portfolio. Whoops, just to get this on screen. So when I talk about a portfolio, it's again sort of going back to this idea that there's not just one way to be a public speaker these days. You can be a public speaker in virtual reality, in live events where you're giving presentations to audiences online within your own Twitch channel, wherever it might be. And all these places are part of your portfolio. Now, what's really interesting, especially if you are at school still, is that many of these online environments are designed for actually more grown-up people to be on. You're not even allowed to create accounts on some of these platforms. So it can make it really hard to do it, which is why it's great to work with organizations like London United and organizations that can help you craft your own public identity in a way that's both safe, but also gives you skills that you can kind of take forward to become a better public speaker. But when we talk about your portfolio, we're talking really about all those different things that are out there on the internet that show people the sort of things that you do. And this gets into a slightly more technical process. But again, it's to remember that there are so many applications out there that can help you put your work out in all sorts of different environments. So here's one example. This is a platform called Anchor. Hands up if you've come across Anchor before. So Anchor is a podcasting platform, and one of the things that it does that's amazing is it allows you to put your content. So you make your content on your mobile phone, and then you can save it and upload it as an episode in Anchor. And once it's uploaded into Anchor, it will automatically push out that content onto lots of other platforms. So one of the things that's difficult is making sure that you have time to do all of these things to ensure that what you're producing actually reaches lots of different people. So for example, how do you make a video that's good for YouTube, that's good for TikTok, that's good for Instagram, all these social media channels that have slightly different settings. And one of the ways you can do that is by using platforms that help you do this automatically. Now, the processes aren't always completely automatic, but they do help you at least make the process much simpler. So there are lots of really great video editing applications that are out there where once you've created your video, you can simply resize it into a different format. And this really gets you to sort of think about what sorts of things do you need to make really good content. And that's sort of the last sort of section of this that I want to kind of get across, because you can make really great content with simply a mobile phone. The microphone in a mobile phone is pretty good, especially if you use the sort of headphones with microphone that it comes with. I see many Instagram creators that simply use their microphones and hold it here to have good sound. But one of the things that you can really start to do is to think about your own setup in your sort of studio, and the word studio is quite sounds quite sophisticated, but actually a lot of it's really simple, and most of what you need is in fact quite cheap. So simple things like this, which I have on my desk, which is a simple sort of tripod. Sticking a mobile phone on a tripod allows you both to obviously make sure that your camera stays stable, but also allows you to have different orientations, but also make sure that your hands can stay free as well. And these tripods cost nearly nothing. You can also make really great tripods out of things that are around you. So you can make stuff yourself that gives you greater stability. Sound's also a really good thing to figure out. You can use, as I said, the headphones that come with your microphone, but you can also use things like this. This is a Rode microphone, which has attachments that plug into a mobile phone. They range in prices. So again, it might be that your school has things you can borrow. You've also got very mini microphones that provide a bit better sound work, that can perhaps improve the quality. And some of this stuff you kind of need to figure out and Google a bit to find out exactly how to make it work. So for example, this microphone, which I hope you can sort of see, has an attachment that plugs into a USB socket. So many microphones come with just a 3.5mm jack, and it might not fit into your mobile phone. So just figuring out that process so that you have the ability to make sure that your content is as good as it can be is one important part of the process. So sound, stability, tripods, software, making sure that you explore different applications that have different editing capabilities. There are lots of really great free platforms out there, and there are many platforms that will they either cost money, but they allow you to have a free version of it that simply puts the kind of watermark in your content. So I've discovered a really amazing platform called Headliner recently, which is a really great environment where you can transform your videos into quite visual, engaging materials using a whole range of sort of different assets that link in with your content. So it's not just the video, but also the visuals around your video. Also thinking about your scenario, your setting. How do you create an environment behind you, a backdrop that sets the scene for the sort of mood of your videos you want to create? So thinking about that environment around you so that you're happy with what it feels like and what it looks like is really important too. So with these simple things, you can start to really create a professional piece of work. And the final one, which is at the bottom here, which is crucial, is lighting. It's one of the things that people don't always think about, but getting the lighting is really important. So even today, you can sort of see that there's reasonable light on my face. So behind the camera, which you can't see, I've got a halo ring, so a halo light, so a ring light that's used for a lot of video making now, making sure that the light source is in front of you rather than behind you is really important. I see so many people give presentations where they've got a window behind them where the light's coming in. It means their face is still too dark. And just by changing your setup, you can have a much better experience for your content and feel that you're developing something that's really, really exciting for people to see. And then the final thing, and this is the bit that starts to feel a bit like kind of work really, but it's so important. And I find it necessary because, you know, you're not doing this 100% of your time. This isn't necessarily your main job or even a big part of your day. And so it can be really helpful to actually work out what is your, we call it a kind of workflow. What is your process to getting the content made and finally then the content produced and out there in the world? How do you create this stuff? And of course, it's not often that you just do one video and that's the end of it. You might do a series of videos. You might make films for the same audience every week. And you want them to make sure that the elements around those videos is standardized. So you know your video is always going to be 3 minutes long or 5 minutes long, whatever it might be. You want your backdrop always to be the same. You want your visual sort of text on the screen or your frame around the video to always be the same. So writing this down, you want your color scheme to be the same. You know, what kind of colors are you going to be wearing? What contrast will you have in your video? All of these things help to establish what we talk about as a brand. And that's really just a fancy way of thinking about how people remember your content. How do they remember that when they see your video amongst lots of other videos, that it's your video that they're going to see, that they remember you and what you do, and then can feel positively about what it is you're sharing. So when you sort of write these things down, it helps you when you come back to the process again each time to remember how you're going to go about it, because it can be quite difficult to remember. There's so many complicated steps in making really great content that it's easy to forget these things. It's easy to forget how do you get, if you're using an editing software on a computer and you're recording your content on your mobile phone, how do you get the content from the phone to the computer? What's the interface for these things? And how can you think these things through in a way that takes less time? So for example, when I record a podcast, I record it on I record the audio on my laptop. I then edit it on my mobile phone and I save the audio to a cloud-based environment that allows me then to access it on the phone. These are simple things you can do to make sure that the process is easier, takes less time, and avoids you having to waste time each time you go about doing it. So just to wrap up then, and again, I'm happy to take any questions that you may have. There are so many things that you can do to make sure that when you do make content for people and when you do stand in front of an audience, you can feel more confident. It's important that you feel that you own the place, that it's your environment, that people are coming into a place where you feel comfortable. It's important to make sure that you have the different things around you that make you feel that this is going to be an enjoyable experience. It's important that you tell yourself that you're going to have fun. Turn it into something that's a bit like being in a playground or being somewhere that you think you really enjoy being and where you have a good time. And when you decide that for yourself, there's a greater chance of you having that kind of experience. You might find that one thing you can really do that helps you is to actually make videos with other people. So set the camera up and do it with a friend, have a conversation about something and make it more playful, because every time you do that, you'll build your confidence to feel comfortable on camera. You'll have an enjoyable amount of takes in the content that you're making that you can look back on and laugh about, but also you get increasingly comfortable with being publicly present. It's not something just to take lightly. It's something to really think through carefully to make sure that the identity, the image that you're creating is an image that you can feel proud of and that you feel comfortable with as time goes on. So thanks for you all for being here, and yeah, happy to take any questions, and I hope you're able to engage with lots of other content throughout the day. Cheers, Ollie.
Andy, thank you very much. I certainly learned a lot. I love the 3+ rule. I saw everyone scribbling away furiously. A couple of people had to drop off and said to send their thanks, but they'll be back next week. So I think the key for us is that we have this opportunity where we have 3 Twitch streams in the middle of December, and we want to give everybody an opportunity to co-present alongside Rambo, who is now joined ahead of the interview we're going to do with TAS, or to co-commentate on FIFA or NBA 2K. Now, it would be very easy to say, we'll just give everyone the opportunity, and we may well do, but I think it would be quite useful for people to take away some of the principles that you've discussed today and make a short video. You've said 2 minutes, it could be about themselves, or it could be them mock presenting a stream. Would you have any guidance as to what you would like to see? And if they're happy, they could share it with you next week, and we could give them some critiquing ahead of it either being played out in the stream or them being involved themselves if they've got the equipment to be able to participate in the stream.
I think so. I mean, I would say that in terms of guidance, if you've not done much of this before, then I'd say keep it on a sort of subject that you feel really comfortable with. Obviously, great if you can make it related to esports and gaming. Fantastic if you can get the content similar to what we're sort of discussing. But the main thing is for the exercise to be something that you can then build on and go forward and feel more confident. So let's say a 2-minute video, which is quite long, and you could edit it, you could chop it up into different parts, you could bring other visuals into it, but you wouldn't have to. You can make a compelling 2-minute video as a conversation between two people without any kind of creative editing. But I think in order to allow people to really explore the sort of fullness of what we've talked about today, then if you want to kind of create content with a range of editing apps, then by all means go for it. I think it's a fun thing to do. And there are so many things. Like there's one great platform called KineMaster. I'll type this into the chat so you can have a look at it. It's a really simple mobile editing app that allows you, again, to bring a whole range of visual content around your video, frame it in different ways. And so if you want to make a video that has these different elements in it, great. But don't feel that you have to. Try to think about those principles that I talked about, especially towards the end: stability, sound, lighting, scenario, all these things that make sure that when you do produce a video, it's going to be the best quality that you can share with people. And simple thing, as you can appreciate, if you're holding a phone in front of you, videoing yourselves, your hand's going to be shaking. It's hard to hold a phone for very long in that situation. So just by setting it up somewhere stable, where you're not going to kind of bang against something that's going to wobble all the time, it's going to be a far better experience for your viewer. So just think about some of those principles. And I guess a lot of the feedback we'll give you is on some of those principles and getting them right. Make sure you've got the lighting. It can be quite hard to sit in front of a bright light for very long, but it's certainly a good way to make sure that your audience gets the best kind of picture when they're seeing it. So try to apply as many of those principles as you can. And I think, Ollie, the content can be just anything that you feel comfortable talking about. It literally could be your day at school. But I would suggest that when you do try this out, you'll probably want to go through at least a handful of takes before you get the video that you want to share with us. And it goes back again to that principle of practicing and evaluating and making sure that you get feedback on what you're doing that can help you produce an even better piece of work.